This discussion concerns how to name hydrocarbons, which are compounds composed of carbon and hydrogen. You will see that once you learn the rules for naming hydrocarbons, then naming other kinds of organic compounds will seem relatively straightforward. There are several ideas here. Firstly, remember we have certain names for hydrocarbon chains that are unique to the hydrocarbons. For example, remember having 4 carbons in a line with hydrogens at every position. That molecule is called butane. And again, you should have reviewed in the modules the naming for a single copy or a single carbon compound called methane, 2 carbons called ethane, 3 propane, 4 butane, and then after that it comes pretty straightforward. But this in any case is butane, 4 carbons in a row. Now if I were to have a carbon atom hanging from the butane, so in other words what we often refer to as a substituent, for example, placing a carbon atom here. And notice what I'm going to do now, rather than writing H all the time, I'm going to fill in the required 4 bonds that carbon requires, which is why with just these little dashes to indicate the fact there are, for example, 3 hydrogens here, and there's a hydrogen up here, and so forth down the line. This molecule I'm going to name 2-butane, 2-methylbutane, I should say. Change that to 2-methylbutane. Because what I've done here is use the locator number 2 to indicate the fact that the substituent, which in this case is the circled methane, is on the 2nd carbon in the chain. So if I just redraw butane and number these atoms, number 1, 2, 3, 4, these are locator numbers. Now generally a substituent in the first position of a methyl isn't going to make a different molecule. I'll come back to that point. But in this case I can put a substituent methyl group on 2, as I did up above, and that's 2-methylbutane. And notice if I try to put a methyl on atom number 3, in filling in all the hydrogens with little lines to indicate there's a hydrogen there, even though I don't want to draw it every time. This is still called 2-methylbutane. The reason being, and this is a very important idea, when I use locator numbers to indicate which carbon atom in the so-called main chain that I'm discussing, I always have to look to number it both ways, either the way I have here or the opposite direction, for example, drawing it this way, where I start out from the right and go leftward. That's still, that 2nd carbon from the end is going to be called carbon atom number 2. So the rule here is when you're using a locator number, you always select the lowest possible number to indicate the position of the substituent. That's the major idea here. The other point is you're always looking for the longest chain in a molecule. So for example, if I have a situation where I have, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons, and again I'm going to start by just placing the requisite number of lines to give the carbon 4 bonds, each carbon 4 bonds, and it's understood those are hydrogens because I didn't put any other group there. Then again I can number this either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or I can number it the other way around. So right next door I'll draw one here in which I have put in the numbering system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So for example, if I were to have, and these, by the way, that long chain here, these are called hexane. That chain is called hexane. So for example, if I had a molecule such as this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and say I were to place a methyl group in this position up here, and then let's just say for the sake of argument a methyl group in this position here, and ask how to number that, using the left to right numbering system I would call this 2,4-dimethylhexane, On the other hand, if I were going to go right to left, I would call it 3, 5. And since 2 and 4 are smaller numbers than 3 and 5, I name this 2,4-dimethyl hexane. So the big rule here is you have to look in both directions when you're asking which is the most efficient way to number a long chain. And of course, again, you always pick the longest chain in the molecule to determine the numbering.